Are you a woman in the corporate world striving to break barriers, challenge unconscious bias, and lead the way for women in leadership roles globally? If so, this is the podcast for you. Introducing Leading Ladies Who Lunch. The lunch hour is usually the time when colleagues get together for real, honest conversations about work, life, and everything in between. In each episode of Leading Ladies Who Lunch, we'll delve into insightful discussions and share actionable strategies to help you navigate corporate life. Co-hosted by me, Cece George, a leadership development architect and inspirational speaker. I'm thrilled to share my experience and expertise on leadership, mentorship, and organizational intelligence to help you own your career.
And me, Rachel Lowndes, CEO and founder, imposter syndrome expert, and mindset coach at Rachel Lowndes Coaching and Consulting. Passionate about helping women conquer imposter syndrome and unleash their inner confidence to get the recognition and promotions they deserve.
Jam-packed with insightful conversations, expert advice, and inspiring stories from a diverse group, we'll explore how to overcome obstacles, shatter those glass ceilings, and build unshakable mindsets to unlock your true potential. So whether you're sipping a coffee or enjoying a meal at your desk, tune in for a no-host bar lunchtime chat. Episodes will be dropped every 2 weeks. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button.
Leading Ladies Who Lunch, empowering women, one conversation at a time.
Hello, welcome back to the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. Rachel, I feel like it's been forever. What's been new with you?
Oh my gosh, Cece, first of all, great to see you. Love you in pink today. You look so delightful.
Thank you.
All right, so much has happened in the last 2 weeks. I really have to share this with you. So 2 really good things happened in the last 2 weeks. First of all, I'm in a mentorship community called She Mentors here in Australia. And I love doing this, like mentoring people. It's really kind of gives me a lot of joy. But, in the last month, I only joined in January. In the last month, I got voted Mentor of the Month.
What? Oh my God, Rachel, congratulations.
Thank you. I'm so excited about it. I'm pretty stoked about it. I don't know why I'm so stoked. It's like getting a school, isn't it? But
That's phenomenal.
Loving that for me. The second thing that happened, and this is pretty wild, actually. A friend of mine has a show called Shed Your Shit, which is all about confidence. She's from a PR background and she's done this whole thing on body confidence. Anyway, this show, you could apply to be a speaker. So when it first got promoted, I was like feeling pretty brave and bold and applied to be a speaker, but also quietly thinking, oh my gosh, if I get accepted, what on earth am I going to talk about?
Right.
So actually, I didn't get selected to be a speaker, which I was quietly glad about. But I forgot that as part of that, you could get selected as a wildcard speaker on the night. Completely forgot about this. And so I didn't prepare at all. I went to the show, that kind of thing. And guess what?
Okay, what?
I got picked as the wildcard speaker.
What? No way.
I know. It was
Oh my God.
bonkers. I actually had this weird feeling, when you get that weird feeling that it's going to be me. I just kind of knew it was going to be me. And as the show was going on, I was thinking in my head, my God, I think it's going to be me. What on earth am I going to talk about?
Oh my God.
So, luckily I'd created this 6-minute speech at a speakers boot camp I did last month. So I was madly running through that in my mind, trying to remember it all. Just in case I got picked, which of course I did. And then, I just got up there. I cranked out this 6-minute speech. And, because it was a comedy show, I did add a bit of spicy language just to kind of get some few mistakes here and there. Actually, when I got up, I spoke complete gibberish. Like this came out of my mouth. Blah, 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 blah. That actually came out of my mouth when I first started speaking. Oh my God, what's happening? But anyway, I did it. I was the wild card entry. I got up, I spoke, I was
Wow.
in front of an audience, completely unprepared, and it was amazing. I got really good feedback at the end, so pretty proud of myself there.
That's amazing. I mean, I'm really impressed that you were able to, even though I know you didn't say that you prepared officially, you
Yeah.
still went with your gut, you trusted your instinct, and you kind of prepared in a little bit of a way. So I'm
Mhm.
really impressed that you were able to go up there and add your own pizzazz and your own Rachel effect to it all.
I know. It was wild. It was actually bonkers. I was frothing on myself afterwards.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love hearing all this good stuff. Okay, I actually do have some news to share with. I love that we're sharing all this good stuff today. It's awesome. I do have some news to share with you.
Okay,
So,
go for it.
as you remember, I did that keynote speech last fall for a room of over 300 healthcare executives and leaders.
Mm.
And it really was an amazing experience. It was actually better than I thought it would have been.
Right.
And I just remember walking off the stage feeling so good about myself.
Mm.
And it really confirmed for me that I wanted to further that skill set. So I'm happy to share that I recently, attained a motivational speaker certificate.
Woohoo! Yes. Of course you did.
Of course. I'm really trying to make this a year of growth and transformation. Really just put myself out there. And this course, I'll definitely send it to you, after today, but this was a 6-week course.
Yeah.
And I really learned a lot about how to put together a speech, like the what the
Mhm.
components of a really well-written speech include, and
Oh,
also how to build your business as a professional speaker.
oh,
So I'm
great.
really happy that I did that. It was really informative. So I'll send you the link and all those
Oh,
details after this.
oh, amazing. Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to know more about that. That's exactly what we are both trying to do, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how we're both on this, similar course here. I love it. So we'd have a lot in common, a lot to talk about.
Right.
All right. So, on a somewhat related note,
Mm,
okay, so I have to tell you, a few weekends ago, I was browsing Netflix.
mm,
If we don't have any plans, I'll just, on a quiet afternoon, just kind of turn on the tube and, bring up Netflix. And a movie that was, from over a decade ago came up. I'm sure you've seen it, Eat,
yeah.
Pray, Love.
Yeah.
And it's based on Elizabeth Gilbert's real life story.
Hmm.
I am a huge Julia Roberts fan, and she actually portrays Elizabeth's character in the movie. And if anyone listening, if you're not familiar, this movie is about a woman going through a major change in her life, and she decides to take a year off and spend it by exploring herself through eating her way around Italy, connecting with her spirituality in India, and then learning how to love again in Bali. So I pressed play and thought I would enjoy it all over again. But there is this quote in the movie, and it's at the part where she's wrapping up her time in Italy, and she says, "Ruin is the road to transformation."
Mm,
And that always stuck with me. And even though I've seen this movie before, for some reason, that phrase really stood out to me this time.
okay.
And it really made me think back to all the times I made a pivot in my career. And
Mm,
the more I thought about it, the more I realized each time that I made a pivot, it did come from a place of ruin, but it brought me to a place of transformation.
okay. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, isn't it? Because I wholeheartedly agree with that. Since some of our most ruinous moments, or they can feel like that at the time, have led to some pretty significant pivots in my life too, particularly the last one where I ended up starting my coaching business.
Right. I mean, you left your role, under, an umbrella under corporate to pursue something so great. And I think that's so courageous, but even when you say, even to people, I'm taking a pivot in my career, I feel like I get this negative reaction, and
Mhm.
that's not what it represents or what it even means.
Mm,
A pivot itself is to change the way you do something. And
mm.
that's what we're here to talk about, taking a pivot as a mid-careerist. So, Rachel, let me ask you this. Have you ever had to take a pivot in your career?
Oh, yeah, I mean, definitely.
Duh.
Maybe not intentionally, because I have been made redundant 5 times in my career. And
Wow.
before anyone thinks I'm a massive loser, that is quite common in the advertising industry. So,
I actually had no idea, so thank you for educating us.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, anyone who's worked in advertising, if you haven't been made redundant, do you even work in advertising? You know, that
Oh,
kind of thing.
wow.
It's quite a common
Okay.
thing. Restructuring for all sorts of reasons because clients come and go, and so agencies just have to do that. But each time, obviously I've had to then try and reinvent myself so that I can go back into another job. And it's quite hard to pick yourself up after redundancy. A lot of people really do take that personally. And I definitely did the first time, but the second, third, fourth, fifth, I'm like, hey, money, I can go and do.
Right?
I mean, I did my kitchen, I bought a car, like all sorts of stuff.
Nice.
Good come out. So whilst I stayed in the same industry, I would have had to, I've had to rethink my approach, sometimes even the role itself. And this was,
Right.
actually handy at the start of career, as it meant I could build up, different sets of skills that means I can adapt as I need to, especially when, you don't know when redundancy is going to come. And so it's good to have different skills that you can draw on. But the last redundancy was the one that led me to where I am now with my coaching journey and business. And, that's the biggest
Wow.
pivot that I've taken, and, one that I'm really glad that I did. It's the best thing that's ever happened to me, really.
Right. And that's a huge leap to start your own business. I think it takes tremendous courage to do that. I think it also takes a lot of grit.
Mm.
So I really commend you for doing that. It's really impressive.
I think those redundancies actually helped me to become quite resilient in that process, in order to then decide in the last one that, all right, I'm going to do something big now,
Right.
Yeah.
So you sort of pushed in that direction.
Mm.
I think the universe has its own magic and power in doing that.
Yeah.
It's interesting because whenever I've told people that I'm taking on a new role in another area or maybe even another industry altogether,
Mm.
the reaction I've gotten from people makes it seem like I was regressing instead of progressing.
Interesting.
And just for me, I've never viewed pivots in that way, but I always felt like I was being judged to some degree.
Right.
Now, granted, I've made a lot of lateral moves in my career, which it was exciting for me because I was able to do something new and learn something new. But again, the reactions I got from people was the opposite. And that's why we're talking about this in today's episode. And, in fact, I remember this one woman who I used to work with. She was a few years younger than me, but she managed to climb the ladder pretty quickly. And
Mm.
so a few years back, I ran into her at a networking event, and she very casually asked me, so what are you doing now? You get that question. So what are you
Yeah.
doing now?
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I was a project manager. And this is what she says to me. She goes, oh, you're still a project manager? Like, what the heck is that?
Oh, you're still a project manager. I mean, so condescending. Very,
Right?
very judgy too.
Yes.
Very. But it's not really for anybody else to judge why we do things. Like, lateral moves are not a bad thing. Sometimes you do it because, maybe you want to work for a different company or a different person.
Right.
Some people actually don't have the confidence to move up the ladder either, so they
Right.
do take lateral moves into the same role in a different company. And there's,
Sure.
ultimately there is something you gain from that anyway. I didn't move up the ladder for years because I just didn't have the confidence to do so. And people probably did the same thing to me, like, oh, you're still a traffic manager. For those
Right.
for those listening in advertising, we do not direct traffic. Traffic is about directing projects and workflow, just so we're clear. But to be honest, they were right. I was still a traffic manager, and I was very conscious of that as well, that I was
Right.
failing in some way, because I couldn't climb the ladder. And obviously the reason was that it was down to my lack of confidence. But for others, it might be a lack of opportunities. Maybe they don't
Mhm.
move up because they need stability in their lives, because other areas of their lives are not stable, and so they need that kind of stability. For others it might be a strategic move, to stay in that role, but they've moved internally to other teams or managers. And so, saying like, oh, you're still a project, I mean, you don't know why I'm doing that, you know what I mean? So that's interesting.
Exactly.
Mm,
Yeah, I completely agree. I agree. It's not right to judge someone on anything they do in life.
mm,
If someone is not moving up in their career, there could be a lot of things happening that impacts that decision to climb.
mm,
Maybe it's confidence, like you mentioned, or some external situation in their personal life. And, I used to work with this woman who she was very content being an analyst
mm,
and she didn't care to move up. She
mm,
was someone who is older than me, and she must have been in that role for at least 10 years.
mhm,
And traditionally, if you're in an analyst type role, it's considered almost like entry level. You would probably spend a few years there, maybe like two, before
mhm,
you move on to the next big role.
mhm.
But she didn't care. She came into work, she did her job, and she left. She
Yeah.
didn't feel the need to schmooze with the bigwigs or impress anyone. She wasn't pursuing a promotion or any other kind of opportunity. She was really happy in her personal life, and that was all she needed. And I know that because I asked her. I was like, do you ever consider moving into another role? Because you're so talented. I thought she was extremely bright. And she was like, listen, in my personal life, I have exactly the kind of life that I want. And this job gives me that flexibility that I can go home to the life that I love.
Mm.
And I really admire her for that. I give her so much credit. And that's where I think I struggled a bit because I used to worry so much about what would it mean if I didn't rise in my career vertically? What would
Mm.
others think of me? Would they judge me and say something must be lacking in her? Why
Yeah.
is she not moving up? So
Yeah.
I spent too much time, I wasted too much time worrying about what other people thought if my career didn't progress in that vertical way, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah.
And I think,
I can
so
relate to
for
that.
you, right?
Yeah. And for some
And
people, they don't want to, as you say, with that lady. Like she was content there. But yeah,
right,
I feel what you're saying there. I definitely felt that, I'm not progressing. What are people thinking about me? And
right.
yeah, I get it.
Yeah. And I think that's why for the majority of my career, I've taken these pivots. And in a way, that became my compass for
Mm,
my career. And that's why I've worked all over. I
mm,
can say I've worked in retail, I've worked in finance, in healthcare. And that's why I have a varying degree of expertise in so many different, roles like HR and quality and operations, project management, organizational development, career and performance development, learning and development. Phew, even just saying that, it's a mouthful, but it's because I've taken those pivots. I was able to gain all that exposure and experience. And I just felt like I was growing my skills in a way that I would become more marketable. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, what an amazing and wonderful wealth of knowledge and experience you have that you can now share with others. And that's something to celebrate. There's definitely method to the madness, if you like, in that.
Oh, Rachel, there's always a method to the madness, I tell you. But I think I'm not sure what would have happened if I just stayed that same course and, did that job over and over for years and years. I just think I would have gotten bored
Mm,
and I would have felt the need to move on. I wouldn't have gained all that experience as you so well, you put it so well just a minute ago. And I think it's really been a journey of learning and growth and self-awareness. And I truly appreciate everything I've acquired up until this point.
mm,
And I also think part of the reason why I didn't stay in one place in one particular role is because I have always wanted to live a very passionate life. And by that, I mean passion in my personal life, through my family, my friends, my relationships, exploring the world, but also my professional life. I always felt this passion inside of me, and I was looking for the right place to unleash it. So, in that way, my career pivots was a result of me searching for that professional passion and rising from the ruin that in a way with each pivot, each role, I was able to take the lessons learned and carry that forward, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with being curious in our careers, is there? Like sometimes too, we don't actually know what we want to do. I mean, I certainly didn't. I took roles based on, well, if this is what I'm doing, I might as well build my toolkit a bit. I had no direction when I entered advertising. It was literally like, well, there's some people here who also don't know what the hell they're doing. Great, I found my spiritual home. But
Your tribe.
yeah. But like, yeah, once I kind of was in it, I was like, well, if this is it, then maybe I should kind of experiment a little bit and kind of build that professional toolkit, as you say.
Right. Yeah, and I think, when you're trying to grow as a person, you do have to be curious.
Mm.
I'm not one for doing the same thing over and over repetitiously. So for example, when I moved from finance to healthcare, I was literally coming from a place of ruin and going to a place of transformation in the sense that I was actually laid off from my position on Wall Street and I
Mm.
was devastated. I had never gone through a layoff before. I don't think I've experienced not having a job. The last
Wait,
time
you
I
worked
think I,
on Wall Street? You never told
yes,
me that.
a
You're
story for another day.
the Wolfess of Wall Street, right here.
I know my glory days from Wall Street. I mean, I was in HR, but still, I can say I was on
I
Wall Street.
mean, who cares? Yeah.
But the last time I didn't have a job, I was underage. I was a minor, so I didn't know what it meant or what it
Mm.
would feel like to not have a job. And at that time, I already had a mortgage and I had a family to support. So I was thinking, how the heck am I going to find that next job? Where am I going to find a job? But then I ended up in healthcare and I spent 13 years in that industry. And it was in that industry that I had tremendous growth.
Yeah, and I think, redundancy, which obviously I've just mentioned, I'm old hat at, a veteran. I think,
Stop.
yeah, I think redundancy has a bit, I think we have to view it as having a silver lining because there's
Hmm.
probably, with that redundancy you got from Wall Street, which, was a shock at the time and there was a lot of pressure on you with, the home and everything else. It's always a bit of a nudge, I think, from the universe for us to like probably we need to change, we need to stop faffing around and get on with like other things in our lives, and something always turns up. But if you have the right set mindset about that, and this is what I always
Hmm.
tell people who, because I have been made redundant many times, as you know, I'll just say it again, in case you didn't know. That something does always turn up, and you just really have to really focus on the fact that this is a good thing. There was probably something I hated about that job or I wasn't happy about, and I wasn't being
Hmm.
honest about that, and actually now it is time for that change. So yeah, that stop faffing around, get on with it kind of thing.
By the way, I love when you say stop fapping around. I think it's so like it's such a novelty for me to hear that because I don't use that phrase in my daily life. So I
You
love when
need
you
to.
start saying
Yeah, you
stop
need
fapping
to
around.
stop
I
faffing
need to,
around,
right?
get on with it. Yeah.
Get on with it. I don't have a good British accent, so I have to like work on all these, colloquialism phrases and things like that. But yeah, I do agree. I think it's a universal nudge telling you need to change.
Mm.
And I think your mindset is definitely, one that people can adopt and to learn from. You have to have that, growth mindset in terms of what else can I do? How can I grow? How can I learn? How can I develop?
Mm.
Like the what can I take from this? So going back to the finance example, going from finance to healthcare, my mindset was I have this new gig and I'm going to reinvent myself,
Mm.
switch it up, take on a new persona. The old me is gone. I'm trying this new industry, this new field. I'm going to be a different person. And for me, each time I took on a new role, I wanted to see what I would get out of it. What connections could I make? And I looked forward to seeing how I was going to now transform my skills. But also, I think I was also looking for what potential would I have for making a significant contribution? Because that's the passion I'm really referring to, is what is my impact going to be? If I had to say, at that time, I think I was thinking about it in terms of legacy. And
Mm.
when I left healthcare, I've been at Macy's Inc. now for 3 years. I had no idea what my impact was going to be until I left and got a plethora, like just overwhelming amount of, emails and texts and phone calls telling me, oh my gosh, can't believe you're leaving. You've done this for us or you've done that for us. So I think when I say societal contribution, I'm looking for what is my impact going to be? So in that sense, I think my key learnings that I had from each pivot was, how am I going to grow in terms of self-transformation, perseverance, and again, societal contribution. Rachel, what about you? What did you learn about yourself in those career pivoting moments?
Well, since most of my career pivots were thrown onto me rather than as a result of choice,
A little bit different.
yeah. I learned that resilience, confidence, and courage comes out of these experiences. And
Mhm.
I would probably never have done some of the things I did or worked on the projects or for the people I did without being forced to
Sure.
pivot down to those redundancies. I mean, that's obviously not something I chose, but I felt I could never be massively intentional about what I was doing as a matter of survival. So, it was like, because I
Mhm.
didn't choose to leave or I didn't choose the next role, it was more like I've got to find work kind of thing. Because
Right.
again,
Okay.
I'm single, I have to pay all my bills, no one's here looking after me. And
Right.
so yeah, probably wasn't as intentional as maybe you were in your career where you made those deliberate choices. I was just like getting into a job going, right, I just got to pay the bills and then figure it out. But every job I've gone into a bit of an excitable Labrador puppy, like ooh, ready to go.
You're all
Like,
excited, right?
yeah, yeah, maybe you like bull out of the gates a bit too fast, but and not perhaps sitting back and thinking about what I'm doing. Um,
Right.
but but that as I say, that last job was the most significant one, as this was where I was getting a bit intentional because I knew I wasn't happy in that role. I knew that somehow advertising had lost like it's I'd lost my passion for it back then. That was about four and a half
Mhm.
years ago. And so I'd already been thinking about my exit plan, what that was, what that looked like. And even though it was a very difficult experience leading up to that, leaving that role. I had some burnout and stress due to the circumstances that I was in. It turned out well in the end because, I had been doing some study in the areas of positive psychology, introduction to
Mhm.
psychology, emotional intelligence, leadership. I was building all of these tools. I wasn't quite sure why I was doing that, but I was really fascinated about human behavior, the way people are in the workplace, what leadership meant. And so I was doing all of these short courses, these trainings. And so then when I did leave, I had like all of this stuff and I had a bit more of an idea of like what it was looking like. It was kind of shaping up into something.
Sure.
And that's kind of why I've ended up in this coaching space, because I wanted to utilize that and follow kind of my interests. And despite those previous pivots not being something that I was necessarily strategic about, the sum of the parts ended up coming together nicely. So, I guess the lesson is, don't be afraid to pivot intentionally or not, because life has a way of placing us exactly where we are supposed to be in the end.
Absolutely. I think you said it perfectly. I do think, life, the universe, brings us to where we're supposed to be. And it's interesting that your pivots were not by choice. And I think that's exactly what it is. I think we have to trust our gut. I
Mm.
think no matter what the situation is, I think you do have to trust your gut and believe in yourself that you will get to where you're supposed to be. And I think it's up to us to just make the best and the most out of each opportunity, take from it what you can.
Mm.
When I was in previous industry in healthcare, I think I reinvented myself 100 times over, and each time I took on a role, it gave me a perspective. It gave me a lens into another side of the organization, another side to the industry. And so, when I worked, for example, when I worked in HR, I went into a role after that that was, completely opposite. I went from HR to data analysis,
Right.
completely unrelated. It doesn't
Totally.
have a connection,
Yeah.
right?
It's like,
And then
what?
from there, right? And then after that, I decided, well, hey, it's time to reinvent myself again. So I took on this role where I was leading a large scale training initiative.
Right.
And then that project ended, and I
Hmm.
went on to become a project manager on the business side of healthcare. And then
Right.
I went to the education side of healthcare. And then I
Hmm.
ended up back in HR and the career and performance development side. So each of these pivots, with the exception of two, is one where I've pursued the opportunity
Yeah.
because, again, going back to what I said earlier, I was searching for what that professional passion could be.
Mm.
So as a mid-careerist, I've taken lots of different career pivots. I've made lots of different lateral moves, but I think each one did have a purpose. Um, I do think there was one pivot in particular that was truly transformational for me.
I mean, that's definitely a lot of pivots, but like HR to analyst. I mean, care. But all of those have, I mean, method in the madness. But all of those
There is.
have their purpose in the grander scheme of things in our careers. They help us decide what we do and don't want to do, while simultaneously picking up, key skills along the way. So you mentioned there was a transformational moment. What was that? Do tell.
Well, it had a lot to do with a former boss and a lesson I learned that led me to another role where I realized finally this is my passion, which is leadership development.
Mm.
And it was exactly what Julia Roberts says in the movie, or she describes in the movie Eat, Pray, Love, that ruin is the road to transformation. And
Mhm.
my experience with this particular boss was so horrible, so traumatizing, that
Mm.
it led me to finally take control of my career and my story.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
you can
can
hear
relate.
more about this experience in episode 4, which will be linked in the description box. So tune into that one if you haven't heard it already. It's juicy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I do think, like all these pivots, I've taken so many of them. I am the queen of pivoting. It did lead me to finding my purpose and my passion. And now I do feel like I'm in the field that I'm meant for. Recently for work, I planned a 4-day in-person conference here in New York City. And the conference is for participants of a leadership development program that I run. And the testimonials and messages that poured in after about the impact that participants had, it's been hugely overwhelming. And that's the kind of success, that's the measure that serves as a catalyst for me to keep doing more of this work.
Yeah, and you are amazing at it too. I think the twists and turns in our careers are what we all have to do to find our purpose. And, people can get really caught up in that whole concept of purpose, thinking it has to be some sort of groundbreaking legacy type of thing. I had a similar conversation with someone recently about that. But as you've highlighted here, and as I've experienced myself, purpose is all about finding what makes you happy and gives you joy in your work, right? It usually has to do a lot to do with the type of impact you can make on others, which is what you're talking about here, like the impact you're making in the work you're doing now. And both of us are working in spaces where we can do that. So, we do have purpose in our work, which then gives us purpose in our lives. And that's something that people listening might want to ponder on as they think about their careers and, those career pivots and what that they might be leading up to, because you can be purposeful in your career without having to make some huge, massive impact and feel like unless you're, a person of influence or a known person or a leading voice, that you're not making an impact with or having purpose. That's not true. Like purpose is
Right.
about the impact you make on other people's lives in what you do right now and feeling happy and successful in what you're doing right now.
Perfectly said. I think our common purpose is exactly what brought us together. And I'm so
Mm.
grateful for that because you're
Yeah.
someone that I can, also learn and grow my own skills on. So I think that is exactly what has tied us together. And I think, you have to have joy and meaning in your work.
Hmm.
We spend so much of our day doing this that
Hmm.
if it's not bringing us joy, it might make it a little bit hard to get through the workday.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've talked about our experiences with taking pivots as a mid-careerist. Now let's talk about what you should consider and strategies for taking pivots in your careers. The first that I would start with is asking yourself a few questions. Does this particular move have an objective or a goal? Meaning, what do you plan to get from the experience? It might be skill set, it could be growth, it could be exposure, or anything else.
Yeah, sometimes the goal or objective is to just get a job, and that's okay, but you can still be strategic about it, figure out
Right.
what you can adequately take from a new role or pivot that will build on a new skill set or experience, for example. So try and think about it from a strategic level, even if it is about survival.
Absolutely. And then next is, what is it about the role that interests you?
Yeah, what can you take from it that can build on your career
Mhm.
and current skill set? Like, what's in it for you, in other words, kind of building on what we said before. Yeah.
Correct. And finally, I would consider this. What will your mindset going into it look like? And mind you, that can change once you're in a role because we never really know what a role looks like or feels like until we're sitting and doing that work.
Yeah, true. Explore without expectation. So have in the back of your mind, what will this role effectively do right now? Is it a gap
Hmm.
filler? Something that you
Hmm.
can use later in your career as something you were curious about learning? Sometimes we get into a job and we think, nope, this isn't it.
Right?
But I learned something, so approach with a curious mind and how you can stay focused on growth at all times, even if the role itself wasn't exactly what you expected. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. So, listeners, friends, wherever you are in your career journey, our hope is that you can take away these insights from today's episode. Whether the pivot is by choice or you're put into that situation, consider what you can get out of the experience. Now, for pivots by choice, take some time to reflect on if you're interested and passionate about the work. Think about what's in it for me. And finally, be courageous to take moves, leaps, and pivots because you never know where it can lead. And don't let the judgment from others hold you back.
That's right. Yeah. So, just embrace your unique journey because success isn't linear and you have to expect twists and turns and pivots along the way. This is literally how we grow. And the most well-rounded and successful people have usually had a plethora of different experiences behind them before they landed on the role that became their passion. And, the journey there was what made it possible to know what that was. So often we have to know what we don't want and get the experiences before we do know what we want. And then we can find it. We find our joy.
Absolutely. I read this quote recently that really resonated with me. It goes, do things at your own pace. Life is not a race. And I just love that.
Love that. Love that. Yeah, totally.
All right. With that, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. If we can leave you with one thought, if you are contemplating taking a pivot in your career, maybe to another role, or as Rachel did, venturing out on your own, don't be afraid to take that next step. You have no idea where you can end up. If you like this episode, we would be so grateful if you can share it with your friends and tag us on social media at Leading Ladies Who Lunch. Your reviews of this podcast mean so much to us. We'd love it if you can rate it and subscribe to the show.
Remember, you can find us and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcast platforms. Subscribe to stay up to date with the latest episodes and follow us on Instagram at Leading Ladies Who Lunch.
Stay tuned for another great episode in 2 weeks.
Until then, stay sassy. Thank you for joining us on the empowering journey at the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. We hope you've enjoyed our insightful discussions, actionable strategies, and inspiring stories that we break down during each episode. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to Leading Ladies Who Lunch on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. And remember, the conversations you've heard on this podcast are just the beginning of your journey. Let your voice be heard, inspire change, and continue breaking barriers as you lead with authenticity, resilience, and unwavering determination.
Until next time, keep embracing your leadership potential, challenging the norms, and shaping a better world for women in the workplace. Leading Ladies Who Lunch, empowering women, changing lives.